I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Environment. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that teach all of us about our priceless environment. Things that have happened to it, things that shouldn't have happened to it, things that we can fix, and things that we may not be able to fix, and show us the importance of not making any more mistakes about our environment. I came here from northern Wisconsin, land of many lakes. Wisconsin has 15,000 lakes, they tell me, and 100,000 miles of rivers, and I thought it was all up north. In fact, when I came down here from northern Wisconsin, I gave away by boat and a couple of my guns. But boy, was I wrong. It turns out that I landed in heaven. I discovered that I was in a part of the state of Wisconsin that probably had more water, more fish, more ducks, and more opportunities in the area I had left, or than in any other area I've ever lived. This Lake Winnebago is just a magnificent gift. Now that doesn't mean it's problem-free. It's anything but problem-free. When I first got here, I went out in the lake barefoot for some reason, and I couldn't see my toes in 6 inches of water. It was that darkened and damaged. Now that isn't true. There has been improvement, but you know, it doesn't happen by itself. It happens because there are people dedicated to making this resource what it might be. And you're going to talk to one of them right now. Her name is Korin Doering. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Not only are you coming here to be a guest, which I appreciate, but you set this thing up. You did all of the work. That's absolutely wonderful. I'm always looking for people willing to do work. But you work a lot, and you work a lot to protect our lake, Winnebago. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I am the Winnebago Waterways Program Coordinator with Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance. And my job is to write a lake management plan for the 4 pool lakes in the Winnebago system. So Lake Winnebago, Poygan, Winneconne, and Butamore. And the reason we need a lake management plan is because as wonderful as the resource is, it's degraded. We have low water clarity, degraded habitat, blue-green algae blooms, which can be toxic to humans and pets, among other things. And so a lake management plan will really help to bring organizations and people from around the system together to strategize about how do we tackle these big problems in such a large system.
Now, Lake Winnebago is a great fishery, and I want you to elaborate on that, because I discovered after I'd been here, thinking I'd left heaven and came here, that people travel 1,500 miles to fish on Lake Winnebago. It's a great, great fishery. It's a lot more than that. Tell the folks what they have.
So as far as fishing goes, it is a great fishery, and that's really important to our local economies. A 2007 study by UW Extension found that about $234 million comes in each year just from recreational fishing, and that doesn't include sturgeon spearing. And so that's really important from an economic standpoint, that we keep those fisheries healthy. Also, I think that the fisheries are just culturally significant to the region. You know, you hear a lot of people, and myself included, who pass down fishing through generations. It's a family pastime that people enjoy. And so that's really important as well. We also have the world's largest self-sustaining lake sturgeon population, which is really unique because in most parts of the world, lake sturgeon are seriously threatened. So, yeah, it's
over a period of time that since the Europeans came here to improve things, what happened to the quality of Lake Winnebago?
It's degraded pretty substantially. So when people first settled in this region, the lakes were actually riverine marshes. They were really big marshes where the rivers ran through. With the dams going in, the marshes were flooded, and they eventually transitioned to an open water system that we see today. And that in itself may be not the full driver as to why all the issues happening, but when you add in the runoff coming in from our landscape, from nutrient and sediments, it's really caused a lot of damage.
Well, up and down the rivers that feed this lake, there was a lot of industry. And my understanding is that the industry just did what industry was doing throughout the world, and that is dumping its waste into something that would carry it away. In this case, it would be carried away, for example, by the Fox River and in Lake Winnebago. And then what happened to it?
Well, with the waste, it used to be that the solution to pollution was dilution, and that's since changed with tighter regulations and more responsible industry and municipalities. We still do have wastewater that goes into our lakes, but that's controlled pretty tightly, and it's important because over 200,000 people get their drinking water from Lake Winnebago. So we need to make sure that we're protecting that resource, not just for the fisheries and recreation, but also that people have fresh water in their taps. Eventually that water makes its way to the Bay of Green Bay and to the Great Lakes. And so by improving what we're doing in the lakes, we're also protecting the Great Lake system.
These improvements, have they been scientific, legal, industrial, or just educating the public, or all of the above?
All of the above. And I think that our biggest concern now is improving what's happening on our landscapes through surface water runoff, and also trying to restore aquatic vegetation in the lake itself.
We're going to take our first break, Korin, and we're going to come back and take this subject a lot further, because people here want to know about their Lake Winnebago. Nothing is more important to people here. In fact, it's our identity. It's why most of us stayed, even though we intended to just visit. Mm-hmm. So we'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. We're talking about a subject that's awfully important to all of us, Lake Winnebago and its watershed, and we're talking to people who are doing something about making it what it once was and can be again. We certainly hope. Korin, I'm glad you came back for a second segment. We've got a number of things to talk about. I think you ought to make clear what group you are with and what they are doing, and what counties are involved in your group and trying to accomplish for all of us.
Sounds good. So the Winnebago lakes, all four of the lakes, hold about 17% of Wisconsin's surface water. And because it's such a big system, there's a lot of players involved. There's several counties and organizations, things like that. The counties got together and wanted to know, what do people think's wrong with the lakes? And the stakeholders reported that they were unhappy about the blue-green algae blooms, polluted runoff, and aquatic invasive species. And so that kind of sparked the counties to figure out, how do we tackle these big problems together? And so the Calumet, Fond du Lac, and Winnebago got together and signed an intergovernmental cooperative agreement to say, this is really important to us. We want to see this resource improved, and we're committed to doing that. So with that agreement came some funding, and they contracted with our organization, Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance, to work with those partners to get the lake management plan done.
And how many people are involved in the science of planning improvements?
I don't have a good count, but dozens. I would say over 50 people we contact regularly on technical teams for different topic areas to figure out what are the problems and what are the possible solutions.
This takes money. Where does it come from?
So the money comes partially from the counties who signed the intergovernmental cooperative agreement, as well as state funding through the Wisconsin DNR surface water program. And
what branches of these two counties do you correlate with to keep them advised as to what's being done and get their input as to what they want done?
So at the county level, we work mostly with the land conservation department staff. They've been really involved and really supportive in the process. But we also work with an executive committee, so the county executives from the three counties are involved, as well as the chair from the Land Conservation Committee and a county board supervisor.
Now, we have all kinds of environmental hunting, fishing, outdoors clubs here in the Fox Valley. It seems to me there's a fundraising banquet every Friday the rest of my life. Now, do you involve any of those organizations?
Yeah, we try really hard to engage with those organizations, attend their meetings, provide presentations on the project, and ask them to get involved. So on our technical teams, we have members of some of those organizations to get their perspective on the different issues. And then we're also going to have focus groups for each of the topic areas, which will be made up of stakeholders that'll help us kind of prioritize some of the actions that we want to do in the landscape.
Well, it seems to me that most of us just complain. We complain if there's algae, we complain if we can't swim or let our dogs swim at a certain time of the year. We complain if we don't like the odor, we don't like the color, and that sort of thing. But in terms of the public, what can we do, and what does your organization help us do in terms of playing our part? Because we really played a big part in creating this pollution.
I think one thing that people can do is learn more about the lake system and why those issues are a problem. And then also get involved in the lake management planning process. Right now we're developing the ideas for the projects that'll happen once we get to implement this plan. I think that's what I have.
When we were off camera between our first and second segments, you told me that some of the pollution in Lake Winnebago, which was totally new concept to me, is coming from the lake itself. Explain that, please.
So a lot of people point up into the watershed as the problem causing blue-green algae blooms and water quality. But a lot of people don't know that decades of the sediment and phosphorus coming from the landscape have built up in our lake sediments. And because our lakes are shallow with such a large surface area, there's a lot of wave energy that churns the lake bottom and is constantly mixing those nutrients back up. And that's one of the reasons we see such intense blue-green algae blooms in our lakes. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is trying to restore aquatic vegetation in the lakes to stabilize those sediments and use some of those nutrients that would otherwise be available for blue-green algae. And one of the ways we can do that is by making some slight modifications to the way water levels are managed at the dams at the outlet of Lake Winnebago.
Now, there are a couple of dams, but one of them is privately owned, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And what control do we have over the water level from that dam?
So the Army Corps manages water levels for Lake Winnebago, and they operate the Menasha Dam, but they have a partnership with the owners of the private dam in Neenah, and so they work together cooperatively to manage water levels.
Everybody who lives in this area, certainly everybody in our state, and probably everybody in the country, has a stake in making this great waterway what it used to be. What is the message that you have to the public? As an individual, what should we be doing?
I think there's a lot of things that people can do. If you're a shoreline property owner, I would say look at what you're doing on your property. Is there something you can do to reduce the runoff from your lawn or your driveway from reaching the lakes? If you live in the city, your storm drains go to our lakes and rivers. So are there things you can do on your property, with your lawn clippings and your pet waste to try to improve what's entering our waterways? And if you boat and fish, be a good steward when you're out there using the resource.
Are we making progress?
We are making progress, and there's a lot of really great people involved in making sure that we're making progress.
We want to make people optimistic. Tell them a couple of things they can do in terms of looking at their lake, enjoying the lake, enjoying the fish they get out of the lake, and swimming. What are some of the signs that we're making progress, that it's a healthier lake than it was 50 years ago? I gave you all the trick questions because I knew you could handle them.
I don't have an answer to that question. I'm sorry. I'm so focused on the now and the future that looking at the past is something that I don't always get the opportunity to do. I think overall, we hear anecdotally from people who were around 50 years ago that the water clarity has improved, that you don't have raw sewage in the lake anymore. So we definitely have seen some of those big improvements there, but there's still a lot of work to do. So I think it's optimistic that we've seen results, but there's still
Well, we should be
plenty more.
very grateful that there are voluntary organizations, that the state of Wisconsin and the local conservation clubs and other people are concerned and taking responsibility for this lake. I like reading about some of the organizations that you're very familiar with that are building reefs out
Yep.
in the lake. They're doing this because they care. They want to bring back some of the quality that we used to have in our lake system that we no longer have. And everybody has a responsibility, wouldn't you say?
Yes, yeah. There are a lot of great organizations that are doing and have been doing a lot of great work. And the Lake Management Plan is just a way to bring those groups together to strategize on how to tackle those bigger problems.
We're out of time. Thank you so much, Korin, for being on the show.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Environment. I'm George Curtis, and I've had the privilege today of interviewing a number of people that are experts on our lakes, Lake Winnebago, Lake Poygan, Butamore, the entire Fox-Wolf Basin. This is so important to us, and it's such a great resource. And there are people who recognize that it's been abused and it's been damaged, and they're doing everything they can do. And with our help, they can do more to bring it back. Your name is Austin Pethan?
Yep.
Tell me who you work for, Austin.
So I also work for the Fox-Wolf Watershed Alliance, and I work specifically on the program that Korin leads, the Winnebago Waterways program. So that includes the development of the Lake Management Plan and also just general outreach to the public, talking about the Winnebago system as a whole, talking about the Lake Management Plan, and just trying to get people involved with our project and continue the conversation.
Well, tell us about the whole basin. It includes a lot more than Lake Winnebago, doesn't it?
Right, so the basin is huge. It includes about 10% of Wisconsin's land base. It sits in 19 counties. It doesn't drain 19 counties. But so it's a tremendous amount of land. And what's really significant about that is any water that lands on that landscape and doesn't infiltrate into the soil, picks up pollutants, runs off the landscape, and ultimately that ends up in Lake Winnebago. Then it goes down through the lower Fox and ends up in Green Bay. So it's a huge area. So the pollution potential is tremendous.
So it's a collector as it comes down, and it collects everything that we foolishly place in the water or close enough to the water without buffers that it runs in the water, but it doesn't disappear, does it? Some of it's indestructible.
Some of the pollutants?
Some of the pollutions don't just go away because they traveled out of Shawano County and got down to the Outagamie County or Winnebago County or that sort of thing.
Well, some of the pollutants can end up in the sediment. Nothing filters them out, and they just end up in our water bodies, and they just sit there.
What are the things that we're worried about that get collected, for example, in Langlade County or in Portage County and come down here and head for Winnebago?
We're focused on phosphorus, and we're focused on sediment. So not necessarily chemicals, but the two main pollutants, and I think it's contrary to what most people think is pollutants. So the nutrient phosphorus, and then sediment, like loose soil particles.
Does it make a difference how we protect our shorelines along these streams that eventually bring the water to Winnebago and then ultimately Green Bay?
Right. I think shoreline properties are something to be seriously considered because they're adjacent to the water bodies. There's so little opportunity for those pollutants to be filtered out. Something that happens on the landscape far up in the uplands, even if it is land that's poorly managed, there is potential for that water or whatever to end up in a wetland. But on shoreline properties, that anything mobile on that landscape has little opportunity to be absorbed before it hits the water.
And I suppose that gets a little bit complex legally, because if I understand the law correctly, as a private property owner, I can own the land up to the water, but the public owns the water. And I think there's a Supreme Court case that says if it can float a log, it's navigable. So the whole state, everybody owns that particular water, but the adjoining landowner has some responsibility.
Right, the water is protected by the public trust doctrine, which makes the water collectively our water. But the problem is, like you just said, the landscape at large is owned by the most part by private property owners. So it's up to them to manage it correctly. And we're seeing some really awesome stuff happen in the landscape at large. There's a lot of talk about soil health. So one example would be in Fond du Lac County. There is a group developing that's led by farmers. So they're partnering with Fond du Lac County and UW Extension, but the group itself is headed by farmers. And they're putting together workshops. They're trying to create opportunities for cost sharing and funding to equip themselves with the resources to farm in the best way possible. But I think it's really significant that it's led by farmers. There's a tremendous talk about soil health and farming in ways that improve our waters. And that conversation is happening all over the system. There's a strong network of farmers in Brown, Calumet, and Outagamie County called the Fox Demo Farms. And these are huge farms, and they're doing really good things like cover cropping. They're doing no-till farming, so not plowing up, planting seeds without plowing the landscape. That keeps the soil on the land where it needs to be, that keeps the nutrients where they need to be. And things like that are happening all over the system.
Well, that sounds like a great development. Actually, farmers should be our ultimate environmentalist. They have a relationship with the soil and the land and the air, and it shouldn't be looked at simply as another cost to have to take these kinds of precautions.
Right. It is challenging. I think there's a lot of farmers who know what needs to be done. You got to remember, farming's in a really hard spot right now, and it takes a lot of usually financial resources to make some of these improvements happen. There's bad farming, and then there's farming improvements that can happen, but they take the resources. I think I see a lot of finger pointing towards agriculture. When we sent out a shoreline survey to over 1,200 property owners around the Winnebago system, shoreline property owners. In that survey, we asked about how they manage their shoreline, what their shoreline looked like. But there was an open comment section, and the amount of finger pointing towards agriculture was tremendous and extensive. So what I'm getting at is I think that is a significant part of the problem, but it has its own challenges that I don't think the public necessarily understands how challenging it can be to reduce runoff from the agricultural landscape.
Well, of course, just making a living is a challenge for
Right.
farmers. They're
Right.
tied to so many markets that they have no control over, and this is a cost factor. Conservation is costly. It's expensive. What we've learned over the last 200 years that no conservation is more costly. But on an individual basis, when you're going to lose the family farm, it's pretty tempting to take a shortcut.
Right. It's hard to invest in new equipment. It's hard to invest in cover crop seed. So we, as Fox-Wolf, we want to make that happen for farmers by helping them get the resources that they need to do these practices. Because, like you just said, it does cost money. So through some of the work that the Lake Management Plan is working on, and different work within our organization in the lower Fox River watershed, we're trying to equip farmers with those resources to make these things happen, because it is challenging.
And the key seems to be what your group is doing, and that's education. I am so grateful that you are willing to come on the show and educate the people who watch this show about how important this resource is, what part they play in its desecration, and what part they can play in its improvement. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, George.
Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the excellent people from the Winnebago Waterways for being on this show and educating us as to the threats of our Winnebago water, the entire system of water, what can be done to fix it. We ran out of time before we got to talk about invasive species. Invasive species are something else that man brought into the system, and man has the responsibility of getting it out of the system, and it's a steep hill to climb. When you have an opportunity, read about these various subjects, threats, and solutions, and start with invasive species. That's my opinion. I'm George Curtis.